everyone, and welcome back to the Queer Magic Podcast. I'm your host, Luis Cornejo, a licensed marriage and family therapist, certified sex therapist, and co-owner of Psychosocial Therapy, a fully virtual group practice in the state of California, where I specialize in queer and BIPOC mental health. And today's guest needs no introduction, and I'm so excited that they're here. But I'm not going to take away the shine. I'm going to let them go ahead and introduce themselves, and we're just going to be talking about their amazing book, All Boys Aren't Blue, which I have read twice, by the way, and I'm just like fangirling right now, but I'm going to keep it together. But anyway, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. I'm George M. Johnson, the New York Times bestselling author of All Boys Aren't Blue. Also Emmy nominated now for the All Boys Aren't Blue dramatic reading done with Nathan Hill Williams. I'm a writer, I'm an activist, I'm an author, an executive producer, and a lover of community. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah, you know what? You're like that. You do it all. I've been following you on social media, and I am definitely a big fan, and I'm so happy that you're here. So thank you so much for joining me and for being on this episode of the Queer Magic Podcast.
Yes, I'm excited.
So, let's get right into it. Let's talk about the book for folks out there who haven't heard about the book or have heard of it but don't know too much. Can you give us a little bit of background on the book and any details you want to share about it?
Yeah, so the book is All Boys Aren't Blue. It's literally a memoir, and I call it a memoir manifesto, but it's a young adult memoir that talks about my life growing up from birth until the age of 21 in Plainfield, New Jersey, with a family that was very queer affirming. So I grew up with a transgender cousin named Hope. I had queer people throughout my life, queer people throughout my family. I would say my family knew since I was 2 that I was going to be queer. I knew around the age of 5 that I was different. And so it also talks about the journey of discovery, the journey of trying to figure out who I was and what was going on with me. And so you watch me on this journey as I have a very supportive family, but a very unsupportive society. And you watch that juxtaposition and how it played a role in my life and how it, shaped the decisions that I made as I was trying to figure out what my identity was. And it really leaves you, it's a story where I went through a lot of trauma and a lot of tragedy. But I had a lot of triumph as well. And so I think it shows like a 360 view of what it means to be a total human. The totality of humanity is like, I'm not just left, I'm not just right. Yeah. Some things are in the middle. And so I think that's what the story is about.
Absolutely beautiful. And, I've read it twice, so I'm not going to give any details out for folks who are still wanting to read it or thinking about reading it now that you've heard a little background. But that was one of the things that really stood out to me that I thought was really special. You mentioned queer affirming family, and I know many of us who are part of the queer community don't often have that experience, and so that was something very beautiful that I read in the book that I appreciated a lot, especially given that some of the stories you shared, were definitely, I would say, traumatic, and some that were very detailed, right? It felt like I was there. Definitely in that moment as you were describing some of the things that you experienced. So tell me a little bit more in terms of your process for this book, because like I said, it's very personal. There's a lot in there. Was there any prep work? Was there anything that you did during this process or challenges that you found in showing this part of yourself to the world?
Yeah, it was interesting. I had been a journalist for many years, so I knew how to write an article. I really didn't know the mechanics of writing a book. And so it took us a while to get there. I guess like the process realistically early on was like, well, what stories do I tell? Because it's just so many, and you start to kind of like rack your brain, and you're like, okay, well, I could talk about this, or I could tell this one, or I could talk about this incident or this thing, and it's like, well, what really needs to go into the book? How do I shape this book? How do I tell, my life story in 300 pages, So it was tough because I have tons of stories, right? Like I have 2 memoirs out, right? Like I have so many stories just about family things and things that have happened. And so with All Boys Aren't Blue, it was like I had to really focus on like what is the message that I want people to leave with when they are done with this book. But that's also like why you have great editors who help you to shape the things that you're doing and help you to kind of craft the messaging in a way that is very different from article writing. Because in an article, it's like I have 800 words or 1,000 words, and it's like, okay, cool. I know I have to be like succinct and snappy and witty and quick.
Yeah.
But in a book, when you have 60 or 70,000 words, it's like I need full detail. I need you to go to that place. I need you to dig deep. I need you to end. That was a lot different for me. So it was a great experience overall. But it was a lot of crying. It was a lot of things, like to really have to go to that place sometimes to like put these words on a page, and a lot of fear, like is the world going to reject me, or is the world going to accept me, or will they say I went too far? Will some people say I didn't go far enough? Like, you just don't know, right? Like, because everything is so subjective. And so like I said, a lot of the prep work was prayer and being in solitude, and just making a decision to just try and put it all out there.
Wow, it definitely sounds like a very intense personal process. And I heard you mentioned crying and also having to, work with a lot of other folks as well to get this going. I mean, it definitely sounds like it's a long and very personal journey. And you even mentioned right now around how folks would kind of take this, right, or how they would see it. And I mean, for those folks out there who know about you and your book, obviously there's been a lot of pushback.
Yes.
And just so much right around it. And I wanted to see if you could maybe share a little bit about your experience. I mean, what are you seeing out there? What are you aware of in terms of your book being out in the world? And also, how do you handle that, when you see these kinds of things and folks that are pushing back?
Yeah, the experience is interesting. I will say the good has always outweighed the bad. I have seen more positive messages than I've seen negative messages. And that those positive messages a lot of times are coming from young adults. And so I know I did something right, and I know I did something that was necessary for them, despite society or a few parents feeling like this book is inappropriate for teenagers, while teenagers are saying this is the book that saved my life. But I mean, that also kind of gives you some insight into the fact that these certain parents do not care about certain lives. Because if a person told you this book saved my life and you're still trying to remove it, you literally do not care about that person's life. And so it's been an interesting journey. I've been fighting against book bans, or I guess for those who don't know, they've been banning books in the United States, like they did in Nazi Germany, which is usually your first sign of fascism, when they try to go at education to restrict what people can learn. And so, last 2 years we've been fighting against book bans, and my book is the second most banned book in the United States, which makes me the most banned Black author in the United States. And so it's been a journey. It's been a tough journey. But at the same time, it's one of those things where it's like, I'm built for this. My ancestors had to go through this as well. And so it's just like, if this is what my purpose is, then this is what my purpose is. And so I just continue to fight against it.
Yeah, and thank you so much for refocusing that and mentioning about the positive and the good messages. I think sometimes we do get lost, right, in all the negativity and all the stuff that's thrown at us. And you're absolutely right. There are so many folks out there like me and many others who really not just enjoyed reading the book, but also felt really connected to it. For me, I definitely found a lot of connections in the stories that you shared. And it even inspired me to think about my own story and possibly even write a book, which is why I was asking you about your book. And I was like, I kind of imagined like it would be this intense, project and a lot going into it. And I also love that you were sharing about how book banning, I mean, these are things that are happening now. Right. I mean, it's intense. It's insane, right, that we're seeing these things, just history repeat itself in so many different ways, and especially when it comes to marginalized folks, and right now the queer community, especially non-binary and trans folks, and having to deal with a lot of political backlash. And I
Yes.
mean, and this shit isn't just opinions, right? I mean,
No.
it obviously impacts our lives, right, day to day. And so, you wrote this book. It's out there. You just mentioned, the second most banned book in the country, and you fighting for it. When you say you're fighting these bans, what does that kind of look like? And I mean, because sounds like a lot of energy, right? You're fighting the system, literally.
Yes, fighting the system. What does that look like? Yeah, I mean, realistically, it's social media
Mm.
is one of our fights. So I'm literally on social media, which I need to start making more TikToks. So shout out to my friend Shaheem.
Like me too.
I'm like, shout out to my friend Shaheem who stays on my neck like, you're not on TikTok enough. Like your voice is needed. So
Hey, it's a powerful tool.
it is a powerful tool. So I'm coming, y'all. But so part of it is messaging through social media, like letting people know that these book bans are actually happening, letting them know like what their tactics are, letting them know like what is actually going on, because a lot of people still just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of it, is making sure that we're correcting any of the negative messaging that's going on through social media. I would say a part of it is political now.
Mm-hmm.
It has now been ingrained in politics as one of the top issues. Not the top issue. I think they're pushing it a little bit harder because they want it to be like one of those top 4
Mm-hmm.
issues that people think about before they vote, but it's not. It hasn't climbed that high yet,
Mm-hmm.
but it is still a political. It's a political tool that's being used. So part of this is political. Again, where you see Florida restricting how we teach slavery. What was it that Black folks benefited from slavery?
Oh yeah, the Florida thing, right?
Yes, DeSantis said. Well, I think the word was like parlayed or something. It was very. It was just like it was like it was very.
He made it sound like an internship.
Like an internship. Yeah, like he made slavery sound like an internship, and it was just like, okay, what in the hell is going on here, right? And it's like, I mean, like anytime Kamala Harris has to like book a flight to Florida to do to go off, like basically to like, are you kidding me? Like, are we really about to debate slavery now as benefits? But that's part of what this is, right? And so part of it is political now because they're trying to literally reshape the way that we teach. And my book is a teaching tool. My book has history in it. It's a history book as well. And I would say the other part of it is like civic engagement, which is and legal, which is, how we show up as community to fight against these things, which is petitions.
Mm-hmm.
We've had students walk out after books were banned, like especially in Florida after they banned my book. My book and several others, 5,000 students walked out of the Florida school system to push back against DeSantis and the Don't Say Gay bill and the book bans. I'm a part of a federal lawsuit in Florida to fight against the book bans. And I'm working with my team right now to possibly take it up a notch in other areas against some of these hate groups, because that's what they are, who are trying to ban books and what have you. So yeah, those are all of the ways and the angles in which we are fighting.
Wow, and that definitely is a lot. So I mean, you're definitely, going for the big fight, and I think that's so crucial and so important, especially given everything you just mentioned. I mean, you're absolutely right when it comes to where we're at right now as a country. And I mean, all of these things, right, are definitely just reinforcements of like white supremacy and all this other shit, right, and trying to ban our stories, right, as folks of color, as queer folks. And history, I mean, to me is probably the scariest thing, is when we don't teach folks the reality of what actually happened and how it's impacted and affected us as a society. We're just living in ignorance, right? And we see that all the time. And I think that's what's really frustrating about a lot of these bans, is that many of these folks haven't even read the book.
That's the truth.
Yeah, and I saw that. I think there was some interview I was watching, and someone had actually asked why they wanted the book banned, and literally their only thing was, oh, it's because it was, you're a queer writer, and that
Yeah.
was like their thing. And I was like, okay, have you like actually read it to see like what's in there, and how there's obviously going to be folks who really do connect with some of these stories and with the themes. I mean, this is the world we live in. And in my work as a therapist and working with 100% queer and BIPOC folks, one of the biggest things that comes up is that none of us can escape any of what's happening. Because we all live in the same world, and we're going to be affected by what's happening. And so it is important for us to be in the know, and also to understand ways that we can contribute and support. And so that is my follow-up question for you. I know you mentioned the fight on your end and what you're doing. Is there anything that you recommend or encourage folks out there who do also want to contribute or support, that what they can do as well in terms of fighting against these book bans and just all of these things that are going on?
Yeah. When you see a book being banned in your local county, like go to the school board meeting and fight, that's literally how they win sometimes, is because they're just the loudest mouth in the room. But we can drown them out when we have large numbers. I think they thought that, oh, if we make our arguments and we read like the worst sections of the book, or the most salacious sections of the book, automatically these people who are sitting on these boards will be like, oh, these have to be thrown out. But what we're seeing is they read those parts, and then people go up there and read other parts of the book, and people are like, oh, so this book is, so this book is a full book. It's a book. It's not just this paragraph that you keep reading. This is an actual book. But that only happens if people show up. My mom, my Aunt Munch, and my Aunt Sarah went to a school board meeting in New Jersey, where my book was being banned, 20 minutes from where I grew up. Mm-hmm. And my mom, my Aunt Sarah, and my Aunt Munch, they read a statement on my behalf, and the book ended up staying. And so, that's really what it's about. Like, it really is important, like, to just show up if you see these bans happening in your community. I think the second thing is, when you read the book, sharing testimonials about what the book meant to you, or how impactful the book was, or the truth about what the book is. Because a lot of times they're just like, oh, this book is porn. That's what they say. This book is porn. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, but you're talking about 3 passages on page 268, 270, and 272. And so, mind you, that's towards the end of the book, because the book is only 320 pages. Yeah. What happened before we got to those 3 pages that y'all are so concerned about, right? So it's like sharing the truth about these books that are being banned is super important. And I would say the final thing is, I think it goes back to messaging, right? And like, I think people don't realize like how strong a statement can be. Like, even just like a shirt that says, I support banned books. I support, like, people don't realize what that means, because if somebody else sees it, they're like, wait, they're banning books, right? Like, so I think people have to start to realize too, like, the importance of like just messaging. I'm a person who, and people who know me, I'm a person who throws on a hoodie that says like the FBI killed Fred Hampton, right? And like, people see it all the time, and they're just like, FBI killed Fred. Like, oh, okay, like, all right, like, like, it makes, and then people Google Fred Hampton, and then they see, and they're like, oh my God, like, I had no idea this story. What is this, right? I wear hoodies that say HIV lives matter all the time, and usually if I wear that one, like in the airport, literally somebody is going to walk up to me and be like, I had a cousin in the 90s, or I had an aunt, or I had a brother, or I had a sister who died in the 90s from HIV. Like, thank you so much. Because they'd be like, I think about it every day, and I don't even know what to, and I'm just like the messaging, right? And so that's why I think it's important too. Like, when you put that messaging on and out there, and you walk around with it boldly and proudly, it helps. It really, really helps.
I was going to say, it's like you give others permission to also share their story and their experiences. And a lot of this is gaslighting, right? That's occurred for so long, where we're often shamed and, stigmatized to not share a lot of these things. And so, I think that's super powerful. You're absolutely right. I'm a little bit of the opposite. I dress very much, gender fluid. And a lot of people often come to me, and they'll often share like, oh my gosh, when I was younger, like I wish I could have expressed myself this way. I wish, this happened to one of my friends. So people see you and
Yeah.
they have a connection. And you were talking about words. Words are extremely powerful. And, just going based off that, I'm wondering when was the first time you realized, before your book, that language and words were powerful in that way?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before. When was the first time I realized that language and words were powerful in that way? It's a really good question. I'm like, what? I'm like, well, trying to think of like a moment from childhood, I guess, like where words meant something to me.
Yeah.
um, I would say, what? I think it would have to be, and I wrote about it in the book. It would have to be, I think I was 15 when my history teacher said that he would have been a slave owner. I think that was the first time, like, where,
Yeah.
like, a statement, like, hit me in a way where I was like, wait a minute. Like, did he just, like, say that to us, like, to the class? Because it just was so triggering, like, to be a black student in a school full of mainly white kids. We were the minority.
Yeah.
Like we were like Filipino, Asian, and white were the majority of the population in the school, and then you had like 30 of us who were black. Like literally, like
You could count.
maybe 30 of us who were in the school that were black. And so, we were the minority, like for real.
Wow.
And so to sit in a classroom and have a teacher say that they would have been a slave owner, it was like, okay. And I challenged it. My friend Janet challenged it. My friend Leanne challenged it because we were only 3 black students in the class of maybe 25 kids. But that was the first time like we were like, wow, like, okay, like words mean things. And like that, like you just said, like, why wouldn't you have been an abolitionist, right? Like it was like the fact that you could just so easily say you knew you would be a slave owner, like that lets me know how you look at me.
And also how they see themselves.
How they see themselves.
Recognizing their power, right? And their privilege.
Like their dominance and their privilege, right? And it's like, and there was really nothing we could do about it, and I think that's what sucked. But I think, in writing it, what, because something happened a couple weeks ago, I had a DM on Twitter from a white woman in New Jersey. And she said her name, and she's like, hello, I'm so-and-so. And she was just like, you didn't mention a name in the book of who your teacher was, but was it Mr. Kent? She was like, if it was Mr. Kent, I am Mr. Kent's niece. And she was like, I knew that he taught there. And she was like, just in reading your description of the situation in him, she was like, I feel like it's my uncle and we have totally separate views. She was like, your book is beautiful. I want you to know you're beautiful, like all these things. But she was just like, I just feel so bad because she was like, as I read it, she was like, I knew it was my uncle who made you all feel that way. And so it's like a very interesting thing. But again, I think that goes back to like what the question was, right? Like when words like impact you, right? Because I'm sure like I'm on one end receiving these words from her uncle, and then she's on the other end receiving these words from me and being impacted and like probably connecting dots and like, oh my God, that's my uncle who treated these kids like that. And she was like, I forgot what she said, but she basically said he was a horrible person. But like, but she was like, yes, those are his views. She was like, he's extremely racist and like, and she was like, trust me, Thanksgivings used to be interesting where we would go back and forth about certain topics. But,
that's not a rarity either.
No.
I've heard from many folks, and even some of my clients who are queer and who are white, who often share very similar stories. I mean, in general, even for me as a Latino, I've heard, this is shit that's been like passed down, and it's part of white supremacy, right? The way that we see black folks in slavery, and many of us, especially as Latinos, who don't even recognize our own history with like colonialism and how that affected us, and slavery intertwined with that. There's so much, and many folks don't actually, know history.
Right.
So there's a lot to unpack. But wow, that's such a powerful story. And, I thank you for sharing that. So for those of y'all out there listening, remember words are powerful. So speak up and speak out, especially with these book bans, especially when folks are trying to suppress our stories and really our rights, right, to be able to exist and live in this world just like everyone else. Another thing that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I caught it in my head and I kept it there, and you mentioned your mom and your aunt and how they're advocating for you.
Yeah.
And I was so curious, like, what was that like? I mean, when you were writing the book, did you like let them know, hey, yeah, I'm going to be sharing some stories, or I'm going to be talking about this, and everyone's going to know? I mean, what was that like for you and your family?
Yeah, I would say I come from a pretty radical family. At first I would be like, oh, I come from a liberal family, but I'm like, no, my family was pretty radical. I had a grandmother who was extremely radical in all ways. Even like the way she supported queer folks and trans folks, and she used to be a nurse, so she used to work with HIV patients, and when during a time where it was like really fearful, and people didn't only certain nurses would work with a person who was HIV, and she was one of those type of people. So like when you come from a person that radical, like it's not hard. And so there were certain chapters in the book that I was like, I'm gonna have to tell them. Like I'm gonna have to tell them ahead of time. And I did, I just sat there with them. It was after actually my cousin's birthday party, my cousin Little Raw. And we got back to the house and we were all just sitting there, and I was like, all right, y'all, let me just, because, of course they're like, well, what's going on in this book? I'm like, all right. The book mainly is about me, but there are certain sections that are going to be a little bit hard for y'all. And I just told them, like, what happened and everything. And they all just were like, okay. Like, it was literally just like, okay. And I remember at Baby G, that's my nephew, when they were doing the baby shower, or was it gender reveal? I don't know what it was. But it was one or the other. And my Aunt Sarah, she just came up to me and she just was like, listen, like, this is your book. Write it. We're going to be fine as a family, regardless of what you write and how you feel about certain people. And I was like, okay. And I think, though, when I ended up writing it from, like, this very amazingly loving way, my family was just like, wow, like, you did the thing. And then they were like, even the family members you may have had conflict with, you still wrote about it in a way that didn't shame them. Because I didn't want to villainize anybody. That was my biggest thing, was like, I don't want to make people villains. I just want to make people humans.
Yeah.
And it's easy to villainize, but it's harder to be like, listen, this person harmed me, but I also understand the harm they were going through as well. Yes. And so I have to have empathy for the harm that you were going through. And this is me, because everybody doesn't have to have empathy for an abuser or, oppressor. But when it comes to my family, it's like, I have empathy for what you were going through as well, and how you projected that anger onto me wasn't correct or wasn't right, but I also understand that you were in a space or predicament yourself and didn't have an outlet, for the rage or the anger. And so I just talked to him, and it all works out well.
And I definitely got that from the book. I mean, when I was reading it, it did feel very beautiful. I felt like it normalized, right, the fact that we have lives, right, and family history, and there's so much that goes into it. I mean, from intergenerational trauma to our experiences with one another. So I think you did a wonderful job. I mean, I definitely felt like it was a lot of our normalizing, and that's something that's really refreshing, because I think most of us are often told not to talk about certain things, or not to be so open about certain topics. And you did share that, when you talked to them, you mentioned the book was primarily about you. And so I'm also wondering, because that's a whole other side, right? That, I mean, obviously writing about family and some of the family stuff is going to be surprising, right, to some of them, or even just having that conversation. But you also shared a lot of very personal stuff about yourself. I mean, did anyone have a reaction, or I mean, was there any type of dialogue or some aftermath to sharing more stuff about yourself? Or I mean, or has it been kind of like more of a you were an open book with them, so they knew all this stuff, or what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't know everything. They definitely didn't know about the some of the sexual abuse I had went through. That was just something they didn't know. And I think, like, I was most fearful of my dad reading the book,
Mm.
And he just was adamant that he wanted to read it. And my mom was like, listen, your father really, really wants to read the book. And,
Mm.
like, he's just like, he just keeps bringing it up. Like, why won't Matt let me read the book? Why won't Matt let me read the book? This was before it officially like fully came out, and I just had like the advanced copies of it. And I was like, okay, like I will let him read the book. And he read it, and he sent me a text message that was really beautiful. Like we have an author in the family now. Like this was he was like, you did such a good job of writing this. Yeah. Even the chapter about me, like the way you wrote it was just so great. And so that helped me kind of like relinquish a lot of like that fear and that doubt, like about like how are they going to feel about me writing this. And then my Aunt Sarah, she also read it, and she called me one day, and she was like, just did we miss something? Like with certain parts, she was like, I just feel so bad. And she started crying. She was like, because I felt like, oh my God, like, did we miss this? Like, how did we miss this? Like, we just didn't know you were going through these things. And I was like, I don't think y'all missed anything. I was just like, it's just that circle of, that's just how life works sometimes. It's like, I was a very different kid. I was super smart. Like, I had the good grades, and I had the high GPA and all those things. So I was like, there was nothing really to catch. Yeah. Because it was just like, well, we know this one's okay, right? Like, this one's got the good grades. This one's going to college. This one's doing all those things. So it's like, there really wasn't much to catch. But I was like, it just meant that things were happening, Yeah.
And I think some folks have that misconception too, right? Where they think that everything is visible, and sometimes it's not. And, that's a really beautiful, just thing that you shared. Thank you. I'm like a little emotional, but I think it's so important for folks to hear this, because a lot of times I think we go on internalizing a lot of shame and guilt around these kinds of things. And even for folks outside, right, extended family members, people who bring up things like this, right? Like, what did we not see? What did we not catch? And sometimes it's not, it doesn't work that way, right? It can be, what's the word? It could be, just very complicated. And so thank you for sharing that. And, I'm glad to hear that, you were able to share this with your family, and that they were able to read it, and that you got this feedback. And I'm imagining that was probably fuel, right, to keep going. I'm sure. And, you mentioned also how when you were talking to your family, that some of them, did have some responses and all of that. Anybody else that you included, like friends or your partners or anything like that, where you kind of had to figure out how to share around, like, this book being out, or just the things that you put in the book? Yeah, I think like the only other instance was my friend Zamis, who in the book I call Zay. When I basically talked about having my first crush in high school with a boy who I wish I could have went to prom with. It was funny because I told him, like, we remained friends throughout the years, and I had told him, I was like, hey, I'm writing about you. I'm writing a book, and there's a chapter about you. And he thought I was lying. He was like, okay, George, like, whatever. Like you always playing on my time. And I was like, no, like, I'm really writing a chapter about you. And like, he's like, whatever, like, just go write your book. And I'm like, okay. So when I got the proofs back, I was like, all right, like, I'm going to send you the chapter I wrote, because we just want to make sure that you're okay with it. And he was like, what are you talking about? I was like, all right. So I sent it to him, and he read it, and he was just like, he called me, he was just like, oh my God, like, I had no idea. And he was like, this is so beautiful. Like, and so that was really, like, I guess, like, the best reaction was like when Zay found out that he had a chapter about him in the book. And then the book, because I'm from a small city. And so, of course, like, my mom and them are all in the city. So, like, people in the city are finding out, like, oh, there's this author that wrote a book about, like, growing up in Plainfield. And so, a woman called Zay's mom and was like, hey, I guess, like, her friend or her sister or whatever. She was like, hey, like, I'm reading this book. As this author from Plainfield that with the Bishop R. And they're talking about this boy that they went to high school with named Zay. And she was like, I think it's your son. And so she called him and was like, hey, like,
is there a book like with a chapter in it about? And so he just bust out laughing and told her like, yeah, mom, like that's my friend George, and like, yeah, we went to high school together, and she was like, oh my god, that's so. She was like, so and so called me and was like, I think your son is in this book. So that was like one of those funny full circle moments because he was like, I didn't tell her, and he was like, it still got back to her. He was like, I specifically was like, I'm not gonna tell my mom that I'm in this book. And he was like, she called me that day, and I just was like, oh my god, now she gonna read it and want to know what's going on about my life and all these things. So yeah.
And I was imagining something like that, right? What would happen, especially when you're becoming a public figure and you're sharing more and more of yourself, and like the scandal of it all, right? And I was like laughing because I kept thinking like, how this is such a white people thing sometimes when you like hear about like like the gossip in the little town. But I love to hear it though coming from folks of color too. Like, hey, we got stories. There's stuff going on. People are reading. People are supporting. People are like, oh shit, like what? Reading something. And I'm wondering in terms of any future projects or anything you can share. I mean, is there anything you can give us around what you're working on right now? Or
I mean, right now the writers are striking and the Screen Actors Guild are striking. So we support the strikes. Okay, we are fighting for equal pay, not even just equal pay, just adequate pay. Like let's say like adequate pay. To continue to create the way that we want to create and create the things that you all love to watch and see. I am working though, my third book, Flamboyance, which is stories about the Harlem Renaissance, will be out next year, October 29th, 2024. So I'm excited about that because I turned in my final draft the other day. So we're moving, right? We will have a book cover release coming up soon. The book cover is amazing. I think everybody's going to be excited to see it. So Flamboyance is coming out. My fourth book, 5 Second Violation, which would be my first fiction book for middle graders, will be coming out in 2020. Wait, is it 2024? No, 2025.
Okay.
And then there's always next year, a book I'm co-writing with Leah Johnson, the amazing Leah Johnson, which is a Black queer young adult rom-com, romantic comedy.
We need those. I love those. I'm such a rom-com person, and now that I'm seeing more folks of color, more queer folks, and more stories around us, I'm like, yes.
And people are extremely excited about that one. That comes out in 2025 as well. Then on the television and film side, I'm still working with Gabrielle Union to develop my book, All Boys Aren't Blue, to a television series or movie. We're open.
Yeah. I was about to ask you that. Oh my God, you
a TV show or movie. And we have a really, really big meeting coming up with a very, very influential person who we know will be able to push us to the next place. I won't say their name, but yes. But they have an Oscar, they have Emmys, their characters have won Emmys, and this is somebody who we know is going to be able to take this to the next level. So yeah, the TV and film stuff is starting to pick up too.
That is so freaking wonderful, and I'm so excited for you. And I just like I'm having a moment because I'm sitting here with you right now. This is my first podcast I've started, and I'm just like fangirling. But anyway, I'm excited for Flamboyant. And what was the inspiration behind the title? Because I'm loving like the titles that you're coming up with and the names, and I'm like, because they're not like coy. They're like
they're out there, right? Flamboyant. I was looking for something like again, because I named All Boys Aren't Blue, I named We Are Not Broken, and so I was like, with this one, I was like, okay, a book about the Harlem Renaissance. Like, what am I trying to say? Like, what do I want to convey? And so I was like thinking, and then I was like, okay, well, I was like flamboyant, like flamboyantly, something around that. And then I was like, well, maybe what if I called them flamboyants? Like, and just like change the word into like a noun, right? Like, and because that's what I'm calling them. I'm like, they're the flamboyants, like in a sense, right? Like they're these people who were like over the top, these bright lights, these shining stars, these queer, powerful people who were lighting up the world. And I called them like, almost like, I guess you would call like Marvel, like the Avengers. So it's like, I call these people from the Harlem Renaissance the flamboyants.
I love that.
So That's kind of where I came up with it. I was like, I want them to be known as like
Mm-hmm.
the flamboyants. And then, I'm always thinking from a brain too of like, how do I turn this work into more work? And so I was like, with that particular title, it reads well for television and film. It reads well in other arenas. It's like, okay. And it's very bold from the beginning. It's like flamboyance. And like, I think people will see it and be like, oh, I kind of know what I'm about to enter already, and I want to know. I want to know what was the tea with County Cullen and
you're prepping them. You're like, get ready,
right? It's like get ready because like, and if you see once you see the cover, it's like, oh, like okay, got it. Like this is we're about to enter this world. So yeah.
And I love that because I know I grew up when flamboyant was used as a slur or even like very negatively, and I've been called that many times.
I was too.
Yeah, and now it just feels so good. Like hearing you share about it and talk about it, I'm getting more of like creative, like colorful, powerful.
That's what I really wanted. Like it's they're colorful, and I think because of the Langston Hughes essay, Spectacles in Color, that was originally what I was going to name the book was something around that, like Spectacles in Color, because that was his essay that basically talked about ballroom in like 1929 when he went to a ball. But it was like copyright issues. Like it's like, well, can we really use that? I don't know. Like we have to ask the Hughes family potentially, blah blah blah. But originally it was like Spectacles in Color was like kind of where my first mind frame was, and then I was like, well, if I can't do that, what am I trying to say? And then flamboyant, I was like, well, that's it. That's colorful.
That says it all.
It says it all.
I love that. Well, I'm so excited and looking forward to reading it. And I'm excited for every other project you just mentioned and everything that you're working on. Is there a way that folks can find you, connect with you? I mean, any social media, websites, or anything you want to let folks know about right now as we're ending today?
Yes, I am everywhere. I'm on TikTok. Well, kind of everywhere.
They're going to be on TikTok more.
Right, I will be on TikTok more because people do love when I go on there. I just be afraid because I feel like you got to be so polished to be on TikTok. Like,
oh my gosh, tell me about it. That's why I'm not on TikTok as much because I'm like, okay, this is a lot.
I'm not doing my makeup. I'm not doing my hair. I'm not doing and but my friend is like, stop worrying about that. Just throw a do-rag on and put the camera in your face and talk. These people just want to hear you talk. I was like, all right.
Yeah.
But I am on TikTok at I am GM Johnson, Instagram I am GM Johnson, Twitter I am GM Johnson, Facebook George M Johnson Garcon, because I am in the House of Garcon. And what else I have? Oh, I'm on Threads. I like Threads. Threads is cute. I am Jim Johnson on Threads.
You kept it simple for everyone.
Right. It's all the same, right? My website is, I think it's imjmjohnson.com. Yeah. So, like, I just keep it. I learned a long time ago from a publicist. Keep your names the same on everything so people can find you. Because I have friends who have like different names on different sites, and I'll be like, "Girl, I cannot find you. Like, what the hell is your damn thing? Because I can't find you." But keep your name the same on all, and you'll be fine. So, I am Jim Johnson.
Y'all already got some gold with that first tip right there. Keeping your same across the board makes it easier for people to find you.
Makes it so much easier.
And don't worry, y'all. I'm going to be adding these to the description like always, so you don't have to keep going back and trying to figure out the name or spelling or anything like that. But I want to thank you again so much for being on here and just really appreciate you being so open and vulnerable and sharing about the book. As I mentioned, I'm definitely a big fan and it's meant a lot to me. So I appreciate you just having this conversation with me. And I hope that folks out there who are listening, if you haven't, read the book. I mean, if you've been thinking about it, it's been on your list, get it. Where are some places that you recommend folks can get the book right now? Just, I'm sure there's digital and also hard.
Yeah, the book is everywhere. It's in multiple languages as well. But we always say support independent bookstores. Independent bookstores are the heartbeat of publishing. If you can't support an independent bookstore, you can always get it from Amazon. Or Barnes & Noble, because we do love Barnes & Nobles as well. Books A Million, we love those places. But independent bookstores are literally the heartbeat of publishing. They, when certain books don't get mainstream love, they get independent bookstore love in a way, and they keep it relevant and they keep it out there in the world. So yes, if you have a local independent bookstore in your area, just Google or, just order it through them because it helps. It helps immensely.
Absolutely. And that's actually, I got my copy at a small bookstore in San Francisco when I was up there. So there are quite a few around the Bay Area, but also LA.
Yeah.
So make sure that's, your first stop.
I feel like Powell's, is Powell's in San Francisco?
I think so.
Yes, I think Powell's is, which is one of the oldest independent bookstores in the country.
Is that in the Castro? Is that?
Yes, it's like, I think, yes, it's near the Castro. Yes. So Powell's is like one of those bookstores. It's the oldest independent owned bookstore in the country. And like, still like one of my biggest support, have been one of my biggest supporters. So yes, independent bookstores matter.
I'm over here thinking, like, now that you mentioned it, maybe that was where I got it. But anyway, the point is, go look for independent bookstores, support the book, and thank you all again for joining, and until next time.